Different by design. Studebaker is. Studebaker is.
Kyle here again at the Studebaker National Museum. Now, we've all seen hood ornaments before. If you're of a certain age, you probably drove a car with a hood ornament at some point. And a few automakers still offer them. Now, the history of hood ornaments and radiator mascots, also called bonnet mascots, actually go back to the early era of the automobile. Now, I am here in the museum's main level galleries next to some very beautiful cars, and I wanted to look at a few radiator mascots that are part of a current exhibition here at the museum called Radiator Mascots, Art, Style, and Story. Now, most of the mascots we have on display as part of this exhibition are from the collections of the AACA Museum in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and the Auburn Court Duesenberg Museum in Auburn, Indiana. Now, if you've seen automobiles from this era, namely the 1920s and 30s, you'll notice that most automakers, including Studebaker, offered a wide variety of mascots. And they were typically brand icons like animals, mythological figures, and so on. Now, before radiator mascots came into fashion, radiator caps served as a sort of a useful function on top of the automobile's grille. So you can see here, this device is called a Motometer. A Boyce Motometer was one common example of that. Now, these were effectively a radiator cap that measured the temperature of the radiator. And this was a very useful gauge for drivers, again, in the 19-teens into the 1920s, because early engines did not typically have water pumps, so they could measure the temperature of the radiator. Now, these sort of devices became obsolete when the dash-mounted temperature gauge was introduced in around 1930. But several automakers also offered motometers that were sort of fitted together with an early mascot like the ones in front of me. Now, as I mentioned, the sort of real heyday for radiator mascots would have been as works of art and sort of statements of automotive style and personalization came in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Now, many mascots were designed by pretty famous, notable artists of the era or studios. And were typically cast in brass or bronze or pot metal from the original sculpture and then sort of finished in a nickel, silver, or chromium, right? And again, many automakers featured mythological figures like or stylized women's form. This was the Art Deco era, after all. Like Packard's Goddess of Speed or Rolls-Royce's Spirit of Ecstasy, as you can see right here. Or even Studebaker's Atalanta, like this mascot here. Now, the fleet-footed Atalanta from Greek mythology was a natural choice for a mascot. The company wanted to convey, again, a sense of speed, grace, and power of its vehicles. Others, like Pierce Arrow's Archer or Auburn's Winged Man, they had mascots that depicted the human form, right, and evoked a sense of strength and forward momentum while also connecting back to the brand and their storied past. So marketing at its best, right? Animals were also very common mascots like birds, right? Studebaker featured several mascots, bird mascots, sometimes called a goose, on certain higher end models like the President, and later all of its models except for the Rockney through about the mid-1930s. Cadillac's Heron, Lincoln's Greyhound, Chrysler's Gazelle, which was featured on the Chrysler Imperial in the 1930s, are other examples of some animal-themed mascots, right? Again, noted for their speed that became sort of iconic brand symbols. Now, some automakers offered mascots for just one or two model years. You can see Studebaker's El Diablo mascot here, a fairly rare mascot featured on some Studebaker models. Or drivers could also customize their own mascot or ornament based on their own hobbies or professional or political affiliations, etc. The sky really was the limit. Now, by the 1940s and 50s, the radiator mascot kind of evolved from sort of decorative sculptures like these into more abstract, streamlined forms that often sort of blended in with the hood or even used as a hood latch lever. Materials like lucite and bakelite were often used, and some automakers even offered mascots with internal lighting mechanisms that activated when you turned on the headlights, for example. Pontiac's Chieftain mascot in the 1950s is a good example of that. So while most mascots have gone sort of the way of the dodo, they do represent a pretty fascinating era, sort of when function, style, story all came together, and they remain a pretty unique part of automotive history. So if you're in the Midwest or you live near South Bend, come see us, check out Radiator Mascots, art, style, and story here at the museum through May 5th, 2024. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll see you down the road.
Different by design. Studebaker is. Studebaker is. Studebaker.